Do I regret making that meme about me and acronyms? I mean, yes. Yes, I do. It is obviously taken on a life of its own, and I really wish I could take it back. But I understand this is reality TV, and whatever. Hey everybody, and welcome back for another grammar short. And today we're talking about a writing strategy, and it's a strategy for answering short answer questions, or what are sometimes called constructed response questions. These are as opposed to multiple choice or true or false or matching. Although if you're watching this, you're probably in high school and you really shouldn't be getting true and false tests anymore. And if your teachers are giving you true and false tests, I feel bad for you. But anyway, you might be wondering, how can I tell if I'm facing a short answer question or a constructed response question? Well, it might look something like this on a worksheet or a test, or it might look something like this on a Google document. That is, that there's a question and the teacher has given you a significant amount of space, so you know they want more than just one word, one phrase, or even one sentence. Today's writing strategy is called RACE. It's not one that I invented, but it's one that I've been using with my students to a great deal of success. They end up sounding, I often like to say that I want my students to sound smarter than they are, or at least exactly as smart as they are. And using the RACE paragraph strategy can really help with that. So it's an acronym, and you know how I feel about acronyms. Let's dig into what those letters stand for. The R stands for restate as a sentence. The question that you're going to have to answer, usually it is a question rather than a sentence that then you're being expected to respond to. One of the easiest ways to sound kind of smart when you're answering a short answer question is to turn the question into a sentence and make that the first sentence of your paragraph. A is answer the question. The second sentence of that paragraph should provide an answer to the question that you've already restated as a sentence. C stands for cite evidence. You are going to have to bring some evidence to the party. Whenever you provide an answer, you've got to be prepared to back it up. So maybe it's a quote from a text that you've been reading. Maybe it's a summary or a paraphrase of something else that you've been reading or that's been talked about in class. Or maybe it's just your own personal experience that comes in as evidence. But either way, in this strategy, you need to have evidence to support your answer. And then the E is explain the evidence. That's actually the hardest part of it, and so I'm going to spend a little bit more time with it and give you another tool in particular to use when we get to the E at the end of this video. But for now, let's talk about how this strategy would look when you're facing a particular kind of short answer question. So here's a short answer question that I used in a previous Grammar Shorts video. This one is, who is most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? Spoiler alert, if you haven't read the play or seen the movie or really been alive at all in our culture, Romeo and Juliet die at the end of the play. So if you were going to try to answer this question in a paragraph that followed RACE, the very first thing that you'd want to do is you'd want to take that who was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet and turn that into a sentence. To do that, you've got to remove the question word. Take out the word who, and you're left with blank was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. Now this is just the restatement. We don't want to put in our answer yet. That's the A, it's the next sentence. So we say something like, one person was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. Then you can answer. And as I said in that previous Grammar Shorts video, whenever that was, I think Friar Lawrence from the play, he's the one most responsible. So you would say something like, one person was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. That person was Friar Lawrence. Bullock, you're thinking, that's dumb. Why can't you just say Friar Lawrence was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? Well, you can. I just wanted to make sure that everybody saw and understood that you can make the R and the A in this race strategy, your restatement and your answer, you can make them into separate sentences. And sometimes that works better with different kinds of questions. But just going with the Friar Lawrence was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet, that is a perfectly reasonable response. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, but what if what you're really facing on a test, what if the teacher has given you something that could really just be a yes or no question? That's a good point. Hey, team, can we get a yes or no question? Oh, yeah, there we go. Did the South lose the Civil War? That's a yes or no question, and the answer is obviously yes. Okay, but here's the deal. Teachers, when they ask a short answer question, they're not asking for your answer to be one word short. They're asking for something more serious. So you can, instead of just saying yes, because you don't want to just say yes or no to a short answer question, you could say, the South lost the Civil War. I mean, that is a restatement of the question as a sentence, but I don't think it really gets at what the teacher is wanting you to do. Very often, when teachers write a question like, did the South lose the Civil War? They're actually asking a completely different question. And this can seriously frustrate a student because you, as the student, you're looking at this and you're like, it's a yes or no question. Why did he give me 16 lines that I can write on when all I need to do is write yes or no? The problem is that there's a hidden question, and you need to be able to take a moment and figure out what the hidden question is. And for a yes or no question, the hidden question is very often why. And so for a question like, did the South lose the Civil War? The hidden question is very probably, why did the South lose the Civil War? And that is a question that we can really dig into with the race strategy. Now, keeping in mind from our Romeo and Juliet question earlier, we can combine the R and the A, the restatement and the answer, into a single sentence. So you can answer the question, why did the South lose the Civil War, with a sentence like, the South lost the Civil War because its cause was unjust and its army was unprepared. There you have restated the question, the South lost the Civil War, but you have also answered the hidden question of why. That is important. So you might be wondering, okay, that Romeo and Juliet question, is there a hidden question in that one? And the answer is absolutely there's a hidden question in that one. It's not just who, but obviously you want to say why. And if your answer is Friar Lawrence, the question is, why was Friar Lawrence most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? There are other answers you could give, right? You could say their parents. You could say it was just Romeo himself. If he'd waited 10 minutes, Juliet would have woken up and it would have been fine. You can say it was Tybalt and Mercutio. If they hadn't had their fight in the middle, then Romeo wouldn't have been exiled to Mantua, and all of that, right? There's so many different possible right answers, but we're just going to stick with Friar Lawrence. So restating the question as a sentence and answering the question, including the answer to the hidden question of why, we would get a sentence like, Friar Lawrence was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet because it was his idea to fake Juliet's death in the first place. Now we get to the tricky part, where we have to provide evidence. The nice thing about a Romeo and Juliet question like this, or almost any question you'd get in an English class, is that there's a text that you've been reading and that you are asked to refer to find evidence. So it's easy enough to dig into scene 1 of Act 4 to find Friar Lawrence saying something to Juliet about faking her death. And we would get, with the R and the A and now the C, a sentence like, Friar Lawrence was most responsible for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet because it was his idea to fake Juliet's death. In Act 4, Scene 1, he tells Juliet, quote, take thou this vial, unquote, which is a potion that will make Juliet, quote, appear like death. There you go. You have provided some textual evidence to back up the fact that Friar Lawrence is the one who screwed up. Can we provide evidence for our Civil War question? Why, absolutely we can. Now, I don't have every single thing about the Civil War memorized the way that I do Romeo and Juliet, in Fair Verona where we lay our scene, blah, 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 blah. So I went to the internet and I found a defense, some evidence of our answer about the South being unprepared. The South lost the Civil War because its army was inadequately prepared. Historian Robert Crick notes that the South had, quote, inferior resources in every aspect of military personnel and equipment. It seems like a pretty straightforward piece of evidence for the idea that the South didn't have a well enough prepared army to fight the war. Now we get to the E, the explanation, and this is where students tend to fall apart, in my experience. They're okay at turning a question into a sentence. Not a problem. They're okay with stating what they think their answer is to the question. Generally, not a problem. They're even pretty good at finding evidence. The problem is coming up with a way to explain your reasoning. You can't just say, Friar Lawrence was responsible, here's a sentence Friar Lawrence said. You have to go deeper than that. Imagine that any argument that you're making is like a trial in court, right? You can say, if you are the prosecutor, you can say what you think the answer is. The defendant committed this murder. And you can even present a piece of evidence. Here's a pen. But unless you say, we found blood on that pen that matched the victims, and we found fingerprints in the blood that belonged to the suspect, then the jury isn't going to be able to convict on the idea that, well, you know what, there was a murder and there was a pen? Well, I don't know what the connection is. So E can be difficult. And to make it a little bit easier for you, I'm going to give you a sentence pattern that you can use now and forever if you want. That sentence pattern goes like this. Usually when blank, that means blank. What you're trying to do is you're trying to connect the piece of evidence that you have cited to the reasoning behind your answer, to your answer. So usually when there is blood and a fingerprint on a murder weapon, it means that the person whose blood it is was the victim and the person whose fingerprint it was committed the crime. So think about how we could do this with Friar Lawrence. Usually when your plan goes awry, that means you are responsible for what happens. Right? It was Friar Lawrence's plan. He told Juliet to take the potion that would make her, quote, appear like death. And then everything went to crap afterwards. And Romeo showed up, he drank real potion, and then Juliet stabbed it, the whole thing. You should read the play. Watch the movie. Go see a live production. That's actually the correct answer. So you're making that connection between why you feel this way and the evidence that you have presented. Can we use usually when that means to finish up our Civil War question? Sure. Usually when an army is less prepared than its opponent is, that means it will lose the war. Right? You're playing Clash of Clans and you don't have enough people in your clan or enough, I don't know, I've never played Clash of Clans, so I don't know exactly how it works. But if you're not prepared, you lose to somebody else. And so making that connection for this particular answer about why the South lost the Civil War, that's important. Usually when blank, that means blank. Anyway, that's race. I hope that you can use this. You can do it in 3 sentences. You can add multiple pieces of evidence to make it 5 sentences or 7 sentences, because you got to explain each one of those pieces of evidence. But in any case, I hope that you take this, you consider using this. It's going to make your short answers sound so much better. You are going to sound on paper exactly as smart as you really are in your head, and I'll see you for the next one.